Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. ****. They kicked her face like she was a joke that went on too long. The sound came first, a dull crack, wet and final, followed by the taste of blood flooding her mouth. Concrete scraped her cheek as she slid sideways, vision blooming white, then red. Someone laughed. Someone else spat. The words came again, louder this time, sharp as gravel in a boot sole. ****ck off, new girl. The night air at Camp Rook was cold enough to sting, but not cold enough to numb the humiliation burning through her chest. She tried to push up. A boot pressed her shoulder back down. Art. Her teeth clicked together, then one didn't. It skittered across the ground and stopped near a floodlight shadow, small and bright like a lie. Cade Rourke kept her eyes open. She always did. Her breath came shallow, controlled, the way it had been drilled into her long before this place, before these men. Dust clung to her eyelashes. Diesel fumes hung in the air. Somewhere, metal clanged, weights dropped in the gym, the rhythm of people who weren't watching, who never watched. She counted heartbeats instead of pain. 1, 2, 3. The pressure lifted and she rolled, coughing blood into her palm. Someone grabbed her collar and yanked her up just enough to whisper in her ear, breath sour with cheap tobacco and confidence. "You don't belong here." The camera in her head, the one she'd learned to switch on when things went bad, took over. Close up, cracked lip, blood threading down her chin. Wide shot, a semicircle of silhouettes, uniforms half unbuttoned, faces smeared by shadow and cruelty. Cutaway, the empty guard tower above them, light blinking like it didn't care. She tasted iron. She tasted grit. She swallowed, slow because panic wastes oxygen. Cade felt the old reflex rise, strike, sweep, break, but she buried it under something colder. Not yet. They shoved her again. She hit the ground on her side, ribs flaring. A hand flashed in front of her face, 2 fingers held up in a mock salute. "Smile," someone said. "This is the part where you quit." The laughter came back, louder, echoing off the concrete. A phone buzzed. A red light blinked. Someone was recording. She knew the sound. She knew the weight of it, the way humiliation sticks longer when it's shared. Cade rolled onto her back and stared at the sky. It was a thin slice of black between buildings, a single star trembling near the edge. She thought of nothing they could take. Not her name. Not the quiet place inside her where she kept promises. Her jaw throbbed. She pressed her tongue to the gap and felt the absence like a door left open. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Counted again. 1, 2, 3. A voice cut through the noise, bored and careless. "Enough." Boot stepped back. The pressure vanished. Someone tossed her duffel at her feet. It burst open, clothes spilling like she'd been unpacked by strangers. "Clean yourself up," the voice said. "If you're still here at dawn." They walked away. The laughter thinned, then disappeared. The red light clicked off. Silence rushed in, heavy as the night. Cade sat up slowly. Every movement hurt. She gathered her clothes with shaking hands, slid the duffel strap over her shoulder, and stood. Blood dripped onto the concrete, dark and steady. She didn't wipe it away. As she limped toward the barracks, a shadow watched from the far end of the yard, still as a statue. Cade didn't see him. She didn't see the way his posture changed, the way his hand tightened on a radio. She only felt the promise settle in her bones, quiet, unbreakable. They thought they'd broken a new girl. They had no idea who they'd just kicked. Morning came thin and gray, like it didn't want to be seen with the place. Cade Rourke stood at the sink in Barrack C, water running cold over her hands. The mirror above the metal basin was cracked down the middle, splitting her face into 2 versions that didn't quite agree. One eye was already swelling shut. Her lower lip was stitched by a medic who didn't ask questions and didn't give painkillers. Cade preferred it that way. Pain kept her present. Pain reminded her where she was. She spat pink into the drain and pressed the towel to her mouth, breathing slow, controlled, the same way she had breathed through surf and fire and darkness years ago. Around her, the barracks woke up. Lockers slammed. Boots thudded. Men laughed too loud, voices thick with the confidence of numbers. No one spoke to her directly. They didn't have to. She felt it anyway, the looks that slid off her bruises, the whispers that stuck to her back like burrs. New girl. Problem. Temporary. She kept her head down and finished cleaning the blood from her knuckles. She hadn't swung last night. That was the part that surprised them the most. Outside, Camp Rook stretched under a low sky, all concrete and razor wire, a place designed to remind you who owned the ground. The training yard smelled of oil and dust. Cade fell into formation with the rest of the transfer unit, duffel at her feet, posture straight despite the ache in her ribs. The man calling roll had a voice like gravel dragged across steel. He paused when he reached her name. Or the name she'd given them. Rourke K. He glanced up, eyes flicking to her face, then away again. You still standing? Yes, sir, Kate said. Her voice was steady. That cost her something. She paid it gladly. The man snorted and moved on. That was how it worked here. If you didn't make noise, you didn't exist. If you didn't exist, you survived. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built a life on being invisible once. She'd sworn never again. Yet here she was, letting them think she was small. Training hit hard and fast. Obstacle course. Live-fire drills. Hand-to-hand assessments that were supposed to be controlled and weren't. Cade took the hits she couldn't avoid and flowed away from the ones she could, choosing angles that looked like luck instead of skill. She let herself get knocked down once, just once, so they wouldn't look too close. She counted breaths. She watched hands. She cataloged voices. Patterns always showed if you waited long enough. At lunch, she sat alone, chewing carefully on soft food she didn't taste. Across the yard, the men from last night gathered around a table, loud and loose, replaying something on a phone. Laughter spiked. One of them glanced her way and raised his chin, daring her to look back. She didn't. The phone disappeared into a pocket. The laughter lingered anyway. Flashbacks came when she was tired. They always did. Salt water burning her lungs. A clock ticking too loud. A voice in her ear counting down in a language that didn't forgive mistakes. She pushed the memories down and focused on the present. The scrape of her tray, the hum of generators, the way the wind tugged at the flag over the admin building. She reminded herself why she was here. Not the reason on paper. The real one. After dusk, as she taped her ribs in the quiet of the barracks, a shadow stopped at her door. A man filled the frame, older than the others, his uniform worn soft with years. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at her, eyes sharp as if measuring distance. You going to file a report? He asked. Kate shook her head. No, sir. Why not? She met his gaze then just for a second. Because it wouldn't change anything. The man studied her face, the careful restraint, the way she held pain like a tool. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe? He nodded once. Lights out in 10. When he left, Cade lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. She slid her hand under her pillow and felt the familiar weight of the small metal disc she kept there. No markings. No name. A promise she'd made to herself when she'd walked away from a life no one here would believe. She closed her eyes and whispered the name she didn't use. Not yet. Somewhere across camp, the men who'd kicked her teeth out planned how to finish the job. And somewhere higher up, unseen eyes began to watch more closely. The game had started. The rain started without warning, hard and sudden, drumming against the tin roofs like a challenge. Cade Rourke ran anyway. Mud sucked at her boots as she pushed through the outer trail beyond Camp Rook, breath measured, spine straight, mind quiet. Night training wasn't on the schedule. That was the point. She moved through the dark the way memory told her to, knees soft, shoulders loose, eyes scanning for shape instead of detail. The rain soaked her hair and traced cold lines down her neck, but her body didn't complain. Remembered this. Remembered worse. A shadow detached from the treeline ahead. Then another. Then 3 more. She slowed just enough to look unsure. Lost new girl? A voice called out, friendly in the way predators pretend to be. The men stepped into the dim spill of a security light, rain slicking their uniforms, smiles sharp. Same group as last night. Same boots. Same confidence. One of them rolled his shoulders like he was warming up. Another held something metal in his hand, tapping it against his palm. Not regulation. Not accidental. Cade's pulse stayed even. This was the moment. The wait between breaths. The space where choices mattered. We're just here to help, the first one said, stepping closer. You looked like you needed guidance. She backed up a half step, letting her heels slide in the mud. Her eyes flicked around, quick and nervous, exactly how they expected. I'm fine, she said. I'll head back. They laughed, closing the distance. The rain blurred edges, turned the world into motion and sound. Kate felt the old switch flip, not the one that rushed her forward but the one that slowed everything down. She dropped her center of gravity and let the first grab brush past her sleeve. A mistake on their part. A gift. She moved. Not fast. Efficient. Her elbow snapped up into a throat, not hard enough to crush, just enough to steal air. She pivoted, heel driving into a knee, felt it buckle. A hand came at her face, she slipped inside it, trapped the wrist, twisted. The metal clattered into the mud. Someone shouted. Someone swore. She stepped back, breathing steady, eyes alert. She didn't finish them. She never did unless she had to. The lesson was enough. The men staggered, shocked, rain plastering their hair to their foreheads. One of them stared at his wrist like it had betrayed him. What the hell? Cade took another step back and raised her hands, palms open, shaking just enough to sell it. I said I was fine, she whispered. Then she turned and ran. She didn't look back until she hit the perimeter lights, heart still calm, lungs still controlled. The rain washed the mud from her boots as she slowed to a walk. She tasted copper again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was restraint. In the days that followed, the air around her changed. The men who'd laughed too loud went quiet when she passed. One of them wore a brace he tried to hide. Another avoided the training mats altogether. Whispers followed her now, threaded with confusion. She caught fragments, lucky weird, don't touch her. No one apologized. That wasn't how this place worked. But something fragile had cracked. During hand-to-hand assessments, Cade was paired with a heavy hitter, a man known for putting people down hard. The instructor's eyes stayed on them, curious. The bell rang. Cade let the first exchange play out, gave ground, tested timing. Then she shifted, slipped a punch by inches, and put him on the mat with a sweep so clean the room went silent. The instructor blinked. Again. Again Cade controlled the pace. Again she chose not to finish. When it was over, she helped the man up, grip firm, eyes respectful. He nodded once, something like gratitude passing between them. That night, the older man from the barracks, the one with the sharp eyes, watched her from the edge of the yard as she stretched under the floodlights. He spoke quietly into his radio, using a code she hadn't heard in years. Somewhere far away, a file shifted. A name surfaced. A past refused to stay buried. Cade lay on her bunk later, rain tapping the window, the metal disc warm in her palm. Her body ached, but it was a familiar ache, honest and earned. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the way fear had changed hands tonight. They were starting to feel it. And once fear learns a new address, it doesn't forget. By the end of the week, Camp Rook had learned a new rule without ever writing it down. Don't touch Rourke. Cade felt it in the space people gave her, the way conversations dipped when she stepped into a room. Fear had sharpened into caution, and caution was louder than insults. She didn't enjoy it. Respect earned through intimidation always rotted fast. But it bought time, and time was what she needed. The training schedule tightened like a fist. Longer days. Shorter breaks. The instructors pushed harder, as if pressure could squeeze the truth out of her. Cade let it. She ran until her calves burned and her vision tunneled. She climbed until her hands tore and taped them in silence. She shot clean, not perfect, careful to keep her scores just below the top tier. Excellence drew eyes. She needed shadow. During a weapons drill, a young private named Ellis fumbled a reload beside her, panic flashing across his face as the timer screamed. Cade stepped in without thinking, her hands guiding his, voice low and steady. Breathe. Seated. Now. He did. The shot rang true. When it was over, he looked at her like she'd pulled him back from the edge of something dark. Thanks, he said quietly. She nodded. That was all. Kindness was another kind of visibility. The men from the rain, Holt and his circle, kept their distance, but the tension between them and Cade stretched thin as wire. She caught their looks when they thought she wasn't watching, the calculation, the bruised pride. One afternoon she found her locker open, her clothes tossed, the small metal disc missing. Her chest tightened for the first time since she'd arrived. She didn't react. Not then. She finished the day, logged her hours, and waited until lights out. The barracks settled into sleep, the sounds of breathing and rustling blankets blending into a low hum. Cade slipped out, barefoot, moving through shadows she'd already mapped. She found Holt behind the motor pool, the disc spinning on his finger as if it were a coin. Looking for this? He asked, smiling without humor. What is it, Rourke? Some kind of lucky charm. Cade stopped an arm's length away. The floodlight painted his face yellow, left hers in shadow. Put it down, she said. Or what? He leaned closer. You going to show us that trick again? For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the disc, to the promise etched into its weight. Cade felt the old anger rise. Hot, dangerous. She breathed through it, counted. 1, 2, 3. She stepped forward and took the disc from his hand. Not with force. With certainty. Holt froze, surprised by how easily it happened. You don't want what comes next, Cade said, voice low. Walk away. Something in her tone cut through him. He scoffed to save face, but he stepped back. You're not special, he muttered. You're just hiding. Cade watched him go, the words landing closer to truth than he knew. The next morning an unexpected order came down. A visiting evaluator would observe select drills. Name unlisted. Background classified. The camp buzzed with rumors. Cade felt the prickle between her shoulders, the sense of being weighed from afar. The evaluator arrived just after noon, a woman in plain fatigues, hair pulled tight, eyes that missed nothing. She watched Cade move through a close-quarters scenario, watched the restraint, the choices. When it was over, she asked for Rourke's file. There was a pause. A look exchanged. Later, as the sun dropped and the yard emptied, the evaluator found Cade stretching alone. You fight like someone who's been trained to end things, she said. And chooses not to. Cade held the stretch, face unreadable. I don't like mess. The woman studied her, then nodded. Neither do we. That night, Cade dreamed of surf and steel, of a trident she'd buried deep. She woke before dawn with her jaw clenched and the disc cold in her hand. Somewhere in the admin building a secure line lit up. The past had found a crack. And it was pressing in. The evaluator didn't leave. That was the first sign something had shifted. By midweek, Camp Rook felt tighter, like the air had been pulled thin on purpose. Drills doubled. Sleep shortened. The instructor stopped pretending it was routine. Cade felt the pressure settle into her joints, familiar and unwelcome. This wasn't hazing anymore. This was a test, one designed to make people break where it hurt most. It started quietly. Her name moved to the top of lists. First called. Last dismissed. During a cold water endurance drill, the timer malfunctioned, stretching minutes into something cruel. Cade stood chest deep in black water, rain needling her face, muscles trembling as the wind cut through soaked fabric. She kept her chin up and her breathing slow, eyes fixed on the far shore where the evaluator watched without blinking. Around her, others shook and cursed. One man panicked and had to be pulled out. Cade stayed. When they finally blew the whistle, she climbed out on numb legs, lips blue, heart steady. The instructor's jaw tightened. The evaluator made a note. The men noticed. Envy crept in where fear had lived. Holt's crew circled again, not with fists this time, but with whispers. She heard her name stitched to words like ringer and plant. Someone spread a rumor that she'd slept her way in. Another said she was protected. Lies worked best when they fed existing resentment. Cade took it all in and said nothing. Silence was a blade if you knew how to hold it. Late one afternoon, she found Ellis sitting alone by the range, hands shaking as he tried to clean his weapon. His eyes were red. They're washing me out, he said without looking up. Said I freeze under pressure. Cade crouched beside him, the smell of oil sharp in her nose. Do you? He swallowed. Sometimes. She nodded. Then you train through it. He laughed hollow. Easy for you. She almost told him. Almost showed him the scars that explained how fear could be taught to listen. Instead she took his hands and guided them, patient, precise. Fear's loud, she said. Skill is quieter. Listen for that. Across the range Holt watched, his face hardening. Later that night the trap sprung. An anonymous report hit the chain, accusations of assault, theft, insubordination. Cade was pulled from her bunk and marched into a bare room under the admin building. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The evaluator stood at the back, arms crossed. Holt sat at the table with a bandage on his wrist, eyes bright with something like triumph. She attacked us, he said. Stole from my locker. Threatened me. Cade felt the familiar pull toward violence and stepped away from it. She met the evaluator's gaze. I didn't. Witnesses? The officer asked. Hands went up. Not many. Enough. The evaluator leaned forward. You want to explain the water drill? She asked suddenly. The rain encounter? The pattern of restraint. Holt's smile faltered. Cade closed her eyes for a second and opened them. I don't fight unless I have to, she said. And when I do, I stop when the threat stops. Silence pressed down. The evaluator slid a file across the table. It stopped inches from Holt's hand. He didn't touch it. Funny thing, the evaluator said calmly. This camp has cameras. Color drained from Holt's face. They played the footage. The rain. The reach. The slip. The moment his men realized they were outmatched. The room stayed quiet except for the hum of lights and Holt's breathing, fast and shallow. The evaluator stood. You're done here, she said to Holt. Effective immediately. As guards escorted him out, Holt twisted back, anger and fear tangled together. "You think you're better than us?" he spat. Kate watched him go. "No," she said. "I just know who I am." When the door closed, the evaluator turned to her. "You've been hiding long enough," she said softly. "They're asking for you upstairs." Kate's fingers curled around the metal disc in her pocket. Her pulse finally jumped, not with fear but with the weight of a door opening she tried to keep shut. Above them, phones rang. Decisions formed. A name, her real one, rose through the building like a tide. The test was over. The reckoning was next. They didn't call her Rourke upstairs. They called her by a name that hadn't lived in her mouth for years. Kate felt it before she heard it, the subtle shift in posture from the guards, the way doors opened faster, quieter. The admin corridors smelled like old paper and disinfectant, the kind of place where decisions hardened into orders. She walked between two officers who didn't touch her, didn't need to. The evaluator followed a step behind, boots soft on tile. Inside the briefing room, the lights were low. A single screen glowed at the far end, frozen on a paused frame of rain in motion. Her elbow at a throat, her foot at a knee, restraint mid-action. 3 people sat at the table. None wore name tags. All wore authority like skin. One of them looked up. "Petty Officer First Class Cassandra Vale," he said. The name landed like a dropped weapon. Kate didn't flinch. She didn't correct him. She stood there and let the past catch up, let it fill the room with salt and steel and nights that never ended. The man continued, voice even. "Black belt in close quarters combat. Former Navy SEAL. Medically separated after Operation Red Current." Silence. Waiting. "You disappeared," another said. A woman this time, eyes sharp, mouth set. "No exit interview. No appeals. You walked." Cade met her gaze. "I was done." The evaluator stepped forward. "She wasn't done," she said. "She was burned." A look passed between them. Files slid open. Photos flickered across the screen, teams in surf, faces younger, harder. One image lingered longer than the rest. A night insertion gone wrong, smoke and water and chaos frozen in time. "Your team didn't make it," the first man said gently. "You did." Cade's jaw tightened. She tasted copper again, memory bleeding into now. She remembered hands slipping, a rope cut too clean, a call that came too late. She remembered choosing who to pull first. She remembered the weight of that choice settling into her bones and refusing to leave. "They kicked you out here," the woman said, tapping the screen. "Hazing. Assault. Why didn't you stop it?" Kate exhaled slowly. "Because violence teaches the wrong lesson when it comes too soon," she said. "I needed to know who they were. And now they know who I am." The room stayed quiet. Outside, Camp Rook carried on, unaware that its balance had already shifted. The first man leaned back. "We have a problem," he said. "And an opportunity." He slid a new folder toward her. Inside were orders stamped with red she'd hoped never to see again. Temporary reactivation. Limited scope. Her hands stilled over the paper. "I said I was done," Kate said. The evaluator's voice softened. "You said you don't like mess. This is a mess only you can clean." Kate looked at the paused image on the screen, the moment she'd chosen restraint over ruin. She thought of Alice shaking on the range, of the locker tossed open, of the way fear had changed hands. She thought of the team she'd lost and the promise she carried in a disc with no markings. She closed the folder. "I'll finish what I started here," she said. "Then I'll decide." The woman nodded. "Fair." When Cade left the building, the sun was setting, painting the yard in copper and shadow. The men watched her differently now, confusion edged with something like respect. Alice caught her eye and straightened, steadier than before. Cade walked past them all, the weight of her real name settling back into place. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not completely. Somewhere deep in Camp Rook, the rules rewrote themselves. And for the first time since the night she lost everything, Cade felt something close to peace, sharp, fragile, earned. But peace never lasted. Camp Rook didn't sleep the night her real name surfaced. It hummed. Whispers traveled faster than orders now, slipping through barracks and along corridors like smoke. Cade felt it in the way eyes followed her, no longer trying to decide if she was weak, but if she was dangerous. That kind of attention was worse. Fear had teeth. Curiosity had claws. The next morning the schedule changed again. Urban combat simulation. Full contact. Limited oversight. Cade stood at the edge of the mock village as the sun climbed, heat already pressing down. Concrete buildings rose in sharp angles, windows black and blind. The dust here was finer, clinging to skin and fabric, finding its way into lungs. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of gear settle into place. Across from her, Holt's old circle had been reassigned, not removed, not punished enough to disappear. Broken pride made men reckless. The whistle blew. Chaos followed. Shouts echoed between buildings. Boots pounded. Smoke grenades bloomed gray and choking. Cade moved with her team, clearing corners, reading shadows. She caught Ellis's eye once, saw his breathing steady where it hadn't been before. Progress mattered. Then it went wrong. A door exploded inward ahead of them, not part of the script. A body slammed into the wall beside Cade, dropping hard. Live rounds cracked overhead, too close, too sharp. Someone screamed. This wasn't a drill anymore. The line between practice and punishment vanished in an instant. Contact left. Cade shouted, voice cutting through panic. She shoved Ellis down, returned fire with controlled bursts, forcing the shooter back. Her mind narrowed, old instincts snapping into place like they'd been waiting for permission. She didn't think about rank or cover stories. She thought about angles and exits and keeping her people breathing. Holt's replacement, one of his closest, charged her from the side, eyes wild. He swung, sloppy with rage. Cade slipped inside the arc, trapped the arm, and put him down hard, her knee stopping inches from his throat. The memory flashed. Another man, another night, the choice she'd made. She pulled back again. Stand down, someone yelled. Cade rose slowly, hands visible, chest heaving. The yard fell quiet except for the hiss of smoke and the distant thud of her pulse. Instructors rushed in, weapons raised, faces pale. The evaluator appeared at the edge of the scene, jaw set. The injured man groaned. Alive. The shooter was pinned, shaking, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his face. Afterward they called it an accident. Equipment failure. Stress response. The words tasted like lies, but they stuck. Camp Rook couldn't afford the truth. Cade washed blood from her hands at the sink, water running red, then clear. She stared at her reflection and saw both versions of herself overlap, the woman who hid and the one who ended things. That night, the evaluator found her on the roof, sitting with her knees pulled up, the camp lights glittering below like a map of choices. You saved lives today, she said. Cade didn't look at her. I almost ended one. You didn't. Because I chose not to, Cade said. Again. The evaluator leaned on the railing. They're asking for you to lead a unit. Not here. Somewhere that needs correction. Cade closed her eyes. She felt the disc warm in her palm, the promise humming. I'm tired, she said simply. I know. Below them, Ellis laughed with someone, the sound carrying up thin and hopeful. Cade watched him, watched the way the camp had shifted around her without asking permission. The evaluator spoke softly. You don't have to decide tonight. Cade nodded. But she knew the truth. The mask had slipped. The past had teeth. And once the world knew what you could do, it didn't let you rest. Tomorrow would demand an answer. Dawn broke hot and unforgiving, the sky already washed pale as if it wanted nothing to do with what was coming. Cade stood alone at the far edge of Camp Rook, boots planted in dust that still held the scars of yesterday's chaos. The mock village sat quiet now, smoke long gone, but the memory clung to the walls. She flexed her fingers, feeling the stiffness settle in. This was the moment after the storm, the one that decided whether damage became lesson or legacy. The summons came just after breakfast. Not shouted. Not barked. Delivered politely, which made it worse. In the briefing room, more chairs had been added. Faces she hadn't seen before filled them. Clean uniforms, sharper insignia, eyes trained to weigh consequences. The evaluator stood near the screen, hands clasped behind her back. Holt's replacement wasn't there. Neither was the shooter. Their absence spoke louder than any accusation. Yesterday crossed a line, one of the officers began. Live rounds. Unapproved aggression. If this gets out. It won't, another cut in. Because we control the narrative. Cade listened without comment, posture straight, jaw tight. She'd heard versions of this before. The language of containment. Of silence traded for order. You handled it, the first officer said. Better than anyone else here could have. That's the problem. Silence settled, heavy. We can't have you doing this halfway, the woman with sharp eyes said. You're either in, or you're gone. Cade felt the words land deep. In or gone. Stay and wear the mask again, this time officially. Or walk and let Camp Rook return to what it had been, minus one inconvenient mirror. She thought of Ellis. Of the way his hands had stopped shaking. Of the men who'd learned fear could be earned instead of given. of the promise in her pocket, humming like a live wire. What happens to them? Kate asked. The room shifted. Them? The ones who think breaking people makes them strong. Pause. Then, they'll be reassigned. Not punished. Not corrected. Just moved. Kate nodded slowly. She'd expected that answer. Still it burned. Give me 24 hours, she said. The evaluator met her gaze. You have 12. By afternoon the camp felt brittle. The men knew something was coming. Orders came clipped. Smiles vanished. Kate spent the hours moving through the place she'd changed without ever meaning to. Range Yard Barracks. She stopped by Ellis, who stood straighter now, eyes clearer. They say you're leaving, he said, trying to sound casual. They say a lot of things, Kate replied. He hesitated. If you go, thank you. The words hit harder than any boot. She nodded once and walked on. As night fell, Holt's old crew cornered her near the motor pool. Not with weapons. With desperation. You think you're better than us? One said, voice cracking. You come in here, make us look weak. Kate looked at them, really looked. Saw fear under the anger, shame under the noise. You did that yourselves, she said. I just stopped pretending. They didn't follow her when she left. On the roof again, under a sky bruised purple and black, Kate took out the metal disc. She turned it over in her palm, feeling the grooves worn smooth by years of decisions. She remembered the team she'd lost. The promise she'd made, to never let power rot her again. 12 hours. Below, Camp Rook waited, balanced on the edge of becoming something else, or snapping back into shape. Kate closed her hand around the disc and stood. Whatever she chose next would cost her. The only question was which price she could live with. The sun hadn't fully risen when Kate Rourke stepped onto the training yard. It was still gray, the air thick with dust and the ghosts of yesterday's chaos. She moved with a quiet certainty, boots crunching over gravel, every step measured. Today was not about drills. Today was about authority, consequence, and the reckoning she'd been building toward since the first kick to her teeth. The men were assembled, eyes shifting, shoulders tense. Holt's crew, reassigned but still present, lingered at the edge, watching her like cornered animals. The evaluators stood back, faces neutral but calculating. Cameras recorded every move. Kate knew she had one shot to reset the hierarchy. One shot to make the lesson unmistakable. Formation. Her voice rang, steady, slicing through murmurs. The men snapped into posture, boots clattering against concrete. Dust rose in small clouds around them, glittering in the early light. Kate's eyes scanned each face, memorizing weakness, hesitation, pride. Each of them had underestimated her once. Some still hadn't learned. Hands up. Eyes forward, she barked. The yard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. You've been testing limits. You've been testing me. You've been testing yourselves. Stop. A scoff came from the far end. Holt's replacement, face red with embarrassment and pride, stepped forward. And what if we don't? Kate smiled faintly. Not a warmth smile. A calm predator's smile. Then you learn. The hard way. She demonstrated precision, 3 controlled movements, each one a calculated display of skill without harm, ending with Holt's replacement on his knees, chest heaving, pride shattered. Silence rippled through the formation. Fear, respect, and shock collided in the men's eyes. Not pain. Discipline. She'd reminded them who held the line and why control mattered. Ellis watched from the side, standing straighter, absorbing the lesson without touching it. The evaluators took notes, impressed but careful. Kate didn't speak again until the formation disbanded. Your actions have consequences, she said softly, voice carrying just enough. Fear is temporary. Respect is earned. Remember the difference. The men dispersed, heads lowered, murmurs of confusion threading through the yard. Some avoided her gaze. Some lingered, learning what restraint looked like when wielded without weakness. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, Kate sat on her bunk, boots off, disc warm in her palm. The fire in the yard still thrummed in her chest, not rage but clarity. She had won, yes. But more importantly, she had set the rules. Camp Rook would never forget the black belt Navy SEAL who didn't need to fight to command obedience. A shadow fell over the bunk. The evaluator leaned against the frame, watching her. You could have broken them all, she said. Kate shook her head. Breaking teaches nothing. Controlling teaches everything. They'll remember that longer than pain. The evaluator nodded. You've earned it. And yet, her voice trailed. There's more coming. You'll have to decide if you stay or leave. Kate pressed the disc to her chest. The memories of the past, the teeth kicked out, the humiliation, the loss, all coursed through her. She smiled faintly, bitter and sweet. She had survived, adapted, and emerged stronger. Tomorrow would bring orders. A choice. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she breathed freely, the fire in the yard cooling to coals that glowed with quiet power. Camp Rook had learned who Cade Vale was. And she was just getting started. The sun rose gold and sharp over Camp Rook, glinting off wet concrete and steel, illuminating every corner where fear and pride had tangled. Cade Vale walked the yard alone, boots silent against the gravel, body steady, mind clear. Today wasn't about drills. Today was about finishing what had started the moment they kicked her teeth out. The men assembled automatically, eyes shifting nervously. Holt's crew had been reassigned, yes, but the memory of her dominance lingered like smoke. Whispers followed her, but they didn't matter. She didn't need them to understand. They only needed to remember. Cade raised her voice once, crisp and unwavering. This ends now. 3 of the men who'd tried to humiliate her stepped forward, pride hanging by a thread. They expected confrontation. They expected rage. They expected her to be human. Cade was all of that, but tempered, calculated. She didn't strike. She didn't need to. She demonstrated control in every movement. A block, a pivot, a sweep, and suddenly they were off balance, humbled, aware that every attempt to intimidate could be countered without violence. The yard fell silent. Fear and respect fused into something permanent. Alice, standing at the edge, watched the lesson sink in. The others in the unit shifted, a subtle realignment forming without spoken words. Cade's reputation was no longer whispered rumor, it was law. Camp Rook had been tested and she had rewritten the rules. Later the evaluator approached, voice soft but certain. They'll follow you now. You've proven more than strength. You've proven authority. Cade nodded, still focused on the yard, on the men who had underestimated her. Strength without control is chaos. Control without justice is tyranny. Remember that. Orders arrived mid-afternoon. Cade Vale would stay at Camp Rook as temporary instructor, tasked with retraining the units on discipline, restraint, and efficiency. Her choice had become mission. The same people who mocked her, assaulted her, had to acknowledge her not just as a fighter but as a leader. Some would resist. Some would leave. But none would forget. That night, Cade sat on the roof, the city lights below flickering like distant fire. The metal disc rested in her palm, warm against her skin. She thought of the teeth kicked out, the bruises, the humiliation, and the loss of the team she loved. She thought of every breath counted, every move calculated, every lesson survived. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Not pride, not triumph, but recognition. She had endured. She had mastered. She had risen. A soft voice beside her broke the silence. You didn't just survive. You changed everything. Cade turned to see the evaluator, eyes steady, unreadable. I know, she said. And the next ones you train will carry that forward. Below, Camp Rook pulsed with renewed order. The men moved with new respect, some cautiously, some awed. And Cade knew one truth. Her fight wasn't over, but it had shifted from survival to purpose. She had taken a place meant to break people and turned it into a proving ground for excellence, discipline, and restraint. Her past, her pain, and her power now formed a legacy she could control. Cade Vale closed her hand around the disc, stood, and looked toward the horizon. The night was long, the sun had set, but a new day was already coming. And for the first time in years she felt fully alive. The new girl was gone. The Navy SEAL remained. And Camp Rook would never forget the woman who taught it that lessons had to be earned, fear had to be disciplined, and respect was forever.